And then when it comes also to the softness of the forefoot of the van.
はじめまして、スパイクマイスターの小平と申します。本日はよろしくお願いします。
Nice to meet you.
それではまず最初の質問いかせていただきます。こちらコパセンスを開発するで一番こだわった部分、そして一番苦労した部分っていうのは何ですか？
I think what will be maybe surprising to you is that the biggest difficulty actually in development is usually the outsole, because if you look at the outsole with all the lines and the details, and especially the wrapping around the heel, that takes a lot of time actually and a lot of attention to detail as well, because also as the timeline of the outsole development is the longest, if anything goes wrong, we have a problem with the project. So this is always usually the biggest focus from our side, because it needs to pass certain testings, certain standards, and we also want to have our players, to be happy with the performance coming from it. But as I said, especially the details around the outsole and all the fine little lines were probably the biggest difficulty actually in developing the shoe.
こちら前作のコパ 20.1 からコパセンスへアップデートしていく中で一番意識したポイントっていうのは何になりますか？
I think the biggest focus point was, as especially the previous Copa was pretty loved and successful actually by a lot of players, how do we actually get it to look even more futuristic and even more in the current times? And especially I see behind you right now the Copa Mundial. We always have, we have our classic boot, but for the new Copa it's always the challenge to move even one step ahead and have a more contemporary design, but we want to keep the same design DNA. So at the same time, evolving a design means also usually a bit of a risk in terms of performance benefit, obviously. So it's always about balancing out a futuristic look and the performance benefit or the performance characteristic that players want to see.
今回のこのコパセンスは流線状のデザインが採用されているデザインが、ユニークになっていると思うんですけども、このデザインっていうのはこのデザインを構築していく中でインスパイアしたものとか着想を得たものっていうのは何かありますか？
Actually, the basic inspiration was a very radical but at the same time simple one, because if you look at Copa Mundial and previous Copa generations, also up until Copa 20 and Copa 19, the lines are actually going over the upper, just from left to right, basically from medial to lateral. So our first starting point on the very first day was, let's turn the lines so they go actually from heel to front. And then when we were looking for inspirations actually, on the outsole and also on the upper, it is very much inspired by neural system, by nerve endings, and when we talk always about anatomy also with Copa, it's inspired by a lot of shapes that you can see actually in the human body as well, being for instance the veins also going over the foot. So this is inspired, you could say, by human anatomy to a certain extent.
じゃあこのアウトサイドとかこっちのインサイド側に採用されているこの波打ったラインっていうのはデザインっていう面が結構大きな意味合いとしてあるんですけど、それともなんか流線状のデザインが両サイドのサポートを生み出すとか、フィット感をアップするためみたいなのも、含まれているものですか？
I think it's more obvious on the laceless version where we have the lines that are going over the upper, but in certain areas there are cutouts actually on the fusion skin that will also allow not only that it holds the foot, but it also will open up anatomically. But on this shoe, it is mainly a design feature, yes, but any debossing on the upper will actually give additional support to the material. So it is following somehow the human foot shape. I would not say it's a major performance focus on this detail.
今回かなりコーパセンスではこの解剖学、アナトミカルというところに非常にこだわっている印象を受けまして、今でもスパイク開発によって解剖学っていうのは結構ベースに考えられていると思うんですけども、今回のコーパセンスでそこによりフォーカスしたっていう何かきっかけとか理由っていうのは何かありますか
？Yes, correctly. I mean, especially on Copa, anatomy was always a part of the inspiration, and you could argue any leather boot is very useful if we talk about anatomy because it's shaping and molding quite easily quite nicely around the foot. So it's probably one of the best materials to focus on when you talk about anatomy. But what was radically different in this design compared to previous generations is that the design process. So we started actually to design the shoe from inside out. We didn't design the outside of the shoe first. We actually started to design, really map out the shapes on the foot, map out the shape of the ankle as well, before we even started to design how the shoe is supposed to look like. So I think the design philosophy was slightly different to previous shoes, where we design a shoe first and then we try to make it somehow anatomical. We went completely the other way around. So we wanted to create a shoe that has the best connection compared to previous Copas with the foot.
選手の方のフィードバックで印象に残ってるフレーズだったり意見みたいなのなんかあったりしましたかね。
In a sense, it was a difficult process because we didn't get it's a really true. We didn't get much negative feedback during the development process because people were kind of surprised maybe what it is. But especially when we talk about the heel fit and the sense pods, this was something we needed a lot of fine tuning, and there was a lot of prototyping to find the kind of universal fit experience in the heel. So this was probably the focus area in terms of feedback from wear testers. And then when it comes also to the softness of the forefoot of the vamp, this is something that needs to be always fine-tuned as well. So there are no pressure points, and the players get the sensation that they need. So I would say it was mainly the heel fit and probably the vamp that needed most fine-tuning during the prototype stages.
今回このコパセンスの10-1とかトップモデルではこのインサイドにタッチポッド搭載されています。従来のボールコントロールスパイクだとこのインサイドの中央ら辺にパッドなりコントロールラバーみたいなのがあるのが通例だったと思うんですけども、今回はこのコパセンスではインサイドの中央ではなくちょっとインサイドとインフロントの中間ら辺にタッチポッドが搭載されるようになっています。この位置に搭載することを決めた理由とこの位置にあることによる好影響というかどういった効果が期待できますか
？I think the biggest difference if you compare it to Predator technologies and Copa technologies is that on Predator you have this rubberized areas obviously, and you want to have as big as possible area to create as much as possible friction. Whereas on this Copa, especially with the touchpod, it's about a foam that is absorbing shock from energy from the ball. So if you look at the shoe on the inside, actually, the touch pod together with the two soft studs on the tooling, actually, they create somehow this, we call it first touch area. So we almost want to inspire players to try to use the touch pod and try to touch the ball with that area to experience it. And we really wanted to radically just put it in the area where we believe is the most common touch area, first touch area on the football.
じゃあそのタッチポッドなんですけども、この柔らかさというか、独特のクッション感を実現している中の素材の性質とか、どういった素材のものが内蔵されているのかっていうのが非常に気になるんですけど、内部の素材はどういったものになりますか？
It's a foam material. I cannot tell the obvious chemical compound to a certain extent. It's a bit difficult topic, but it's a soft foam, and actually we tried different densities of foam as well, because again, when we talk about Copa and about anatomy, we always priority is a good fitting shoe. So using a too hard foam might create pressure points, and using a foam that is too soft might not give the benefit that we were actually looking for. So it's a foam that is actually with a not that high density in the end, so it actually can create the soft sensation, and on the other hand it doesn't irritate actually the foot, especially in the very sensitive areas where the tooth pods are placed.
このインサイド側にあるタッチポッドの中の素材とアウトサイド側にあるタッチポッドの中の素材っていうのは同じですか、それとも異なりますか？
It's the same material, but the size obviously of the pods is slightly different.
前作の、コパ 20.1 とかではこのインステップエリアがモノタン構造って呼ばれる構造になってまして、この構造を気に入ってるプレイヤーも多くいたと思うんですけども、今回のコパセンスの点1ですねではここがショートタンになってます。この終端を変更した狙いといいますか理由は何かありますか？
So as you said, it was very much liked by a certain amount of players on previous generation. There are mainly two reasons. Number one is that as the shoe actually turned in the design process very futuristic, we thought like there needs to be one at least classic element on the shoe. We thought actually a U-throat construction, the floating tongue construction, is a nice kind of throwback to classic football boots or leather boots. So that's maybe almost like the only element. But actually the biggest benefit you get from that construction, as you probably know, is that actually we can have more foot shapes fitting into like accommodate in the shoe, because you basically can widen the shoe more than in previous generation. So this was also one of the reasons why we went for this construction.
前作のコパ 20.1FG と、今回のコパセンス点1の FG を比べると、こちらの新作では約 15g ほどちょっと重量が増加しているデータが出たんですけども、それについては開発者目線としてどういうふうに捉えられてますか？
Obviously 15g is something that you see on a scale, but not necessarily can be perceived on foot. But the priority for the Copa Sense, as it wasn't to make it a lightweight shoe, we didn't want to make a compromise in terms of fit or comfort. So even though, yes, it ended up being a bit more heavy, but we made the conscious decision not to take anything out that might actually harm overall the shoe compared to the previous model.
なんかサッカースパイクが好きでサッカースパイク開発者を目指している学生とか日本にもたくさんいると思うんですけども、そういった若いプレイヤーとか若い人に向けて何かアドバイスとか今のうちにやっておいた方がいいこととかっていうのが何かありましたら教えていただけるとありがたいです。
What I can say is, if I just look at my team or actually the teams around me, is that there is no defined path how to get into this job, because I think what is very important is that we get different backgrounds, different inspirations also into the process. That makes the process actually way more richer and easier. I think the most important bits are being, first of all, interested in shoes and like really into details. It helps actually to be interested not only in football shoes but maybe in fashion overall, and somehow developing the interest of moving something forward or dreaming a bit what the future of football could be. I think that's an attitude that applicants going forward need to have. But any kind of background in business, sports, marketing, is the possibility to get into that business.
こちら、コパムンディアルっていうザ・フットボールブーツから今回のコパセンスではもうテクノロジーの進歩とかもうフュージョンスキンの凄さっていうのが体感できるスパイクに仕上がってると思うんですけど、すごいレーザースパイクが今現状ある中でおいて、こっからさらに10年後のレーザースパイクを開発されている開発者目線でどういう形、どういうフォルム、どういう構造になっていると予想されますか？
I think it depends. So if you the biggest difference between Copa Mundial and Copa Sense is actually not on the boot. It's also that the game has changed quite a lot between the 80s when it got launched and now. So it got faster. I think also different styles of playing are right now there. So it's probably a matter of if there will be again any developments in the game of football that we need to adapt the footwear shapes, the shoe shapes. Could imagine in 10 years time we talk more about digital components potentially in the shoe, or it's again, I think in terms of weight there's still also something to be done. I cannot really, 10 years is a long time in the end, but the topics of which kind of materials we will use additionally to leather, potentially this might be a big territory to observe. Yeah.
ありがとうございます。それではじゃあ最後に今回の新しくなったコパセンス、どういったプレイヤーに入ってほしいですか？
Oh, what kind of player type? I think the player that will resonate best with Copa is the player that somehow has a certain talent with the ball. So it's a player that is really maybe not the fastest player, it's not the strongest player, but it's a player that is maybe a little bit more clever than everyone else on the pitch, and also a player that has this certain ability with the ball that other players don't have. So it's a player that has a very unique friendship, I would say, almost a connection with the ball compared to the other players.
本日はありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. Very interesting questions.
Thank you.